everybody. Thank you for joining me again today. This is for September 2021, and we are past the year point of doing these networking sessions. So I'm really glad. If you've never been here before, I'm really glad that you're joining us. And if you're not with us live, I'm glad that you're joining us via recording. My name is Sharon Chaden Glass. I'm an instructional media designer for Sinclair Community College. And before that, I used to teach English to international students. And one of our guest speakers today actually did the same thing that I did. He made the transition from TESOL into instructional design. So we'll get to hear from him. My guest speakers today, we have Michael Vanderpool. We have Kassie Dwarika and Daniel Johnson, and they will be speaking in that order. Michael, let me get a spotlight on you, and it's all yours.
And mute myself. There I am. Hello, everybody. How are you? Mike Vanderpool. I am faculty at Northwest State Community College. I teach visual communication, graphic design. I am also director of curriculum and instruction for Stage 3 Talent, which builds software development, data science, cloud curriculum. Like most instructional designers I talk to, it's a long and winding road to get to where I am. I had been an entrepreneur for a while down in Florida in the real estate market, and at 2008 happened, and I had to come running back home with no money and go live with my mom for a while. At that time, I'd always been somebody who, because of the entrepreneurial stuff that I had done and helping other people, I had experience with visual communication, building websites, doing photography, videography, all that kind of good stuff. I went and talked to someone in the visual communication program at Bowling Green State University and kind of gave my spiel about what I'd done in life, and was looking to start the VCT program there. And I was fortunate enough where Donna Troutman said, hey, you really should go ahead and look at our instructional design program. I believe it's called, it's a Master's of Education in Learning, Design, and Technology. I'll back up. I've got a bachelor's in English that I've never used. I still can't figure out where commas go. I was fortunate enough because that was an online program. But I was a grad assistant, so I had the fortune of having my office next to my teacher's office. So I kind of got the best of both worlds, like taking online instruction, but also being able to have conversations with my faculty, which was something I appreciated my time at community college in a 4-year. Was also fortunate because I had a grad assistant, I got to teach in class video production, which is something I'd played with for quite a while. The teaching bug really hit. I loved it. I loved being able to stand in front of a classroom, kind of guide people and do some cool stuff like that. The instructional design stuff that I learned was a bit frustrating because I was learning about things in a way that was counter to the learning science that I was being taught. It was a little frustrating. After graduation, I went and worked for a company called The Learning House out of Louisville, Kentucky. They have recently been acquired by Wiley, but they're an online program management company. Basically, revenue share for all the enrollment work that they did for smaller colleges, typically about 3,000 enrollment, mostly private colleges or smaller colleges. Learning House purchased a company called the Software Guild at the time, which was one of the first coding boot camps in the country for Java and C#. And I got pulled over as the instructional coach. We had a lot of software developers who were trying to teach, weren't trained as teachers. I tried to help them become better teachers. As part of that, really started to help work on building curriculum, refining curriculum. We used Zoom before most people even knew what Zoom was as part of our instructional stuff. Did a lot of cool stuff in that space. Long story short, eventually became a faculty, been teaching for 6 years in variety of models, primarily face-to-face, but also hybrid, blended, and online. And now with Stage 3 Talent, we are delivering curriculum content in remote synchronous model. And right now we're in the middle of planning for what we're calling, it's not asynchronous because it's asynchronous with some level of being able to connect with a mentor along the way. But that is my position there, is really setting what that product looks like for the future, along with running our team of learning experience designers. We're specifically calling them LXDs, learning experience designers, versus instructional designers, because I've found that IDs come in with a very specific mindset on what they do, which is a little bit different than what we try to do at Stage 3 Talent. So that's me.
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting myself too.
All good.
What I wanted to say, I was thinking about the difference between learning designer and instructional designer. I think that you're right. They mean different things to people. And would you mind just talking just a little bit more about what you see the difference between those two jobs as? Because I know some people here might be like, what is the difference? Would you like to speak about that?
And you know, so it's, yes, but it's only going to come from my limited perspective, right? I worked at the Learning House, and when Learning House first got hired there, they were course designers. They weren't even instructional designers. And I think that they called them course designers because they didn't want to actually pay them an instructional designer rate. Full disclosure, right? But the perspective that I've seen, what I've witnessed, again, it's been on the academic side, so not as much on the corporate training side of the house, is that a instructional designer is very much a project manager only, checking off the boxes that, oh, it's got LOs, and oh, those LOs, they start with a Bloom's word, but they don't actually like connect into anything measurable, right? A lot of just making sure a course has something versus actually like looking at helping an instructor design the wider experience that the learner is going to have in the space. Instructional design that I've run into and what I've seen taught is very much, I'm designing a set of instructions for somebody to kind of follow, or content for somebody to linearly go through. And as a learner who knows that's complete and utter BS when it comes to how you need to go through content, right? Trying to take a human-centered design thinking approach to curriculum development, testing, prototyping, all those things, I feel like that is probably more in line with what we need. And that is probably lines up better with somebody being called a learning experience designer. User experience, right? We're building for users who just happen to be learners, is a more appropriate term for what we're trying to accomplish.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. All right, we're moving on to Cassie. Cassie, I'm gonna replace my spotlight and you're free to go.
Oh, hi, I'm Kassie Dwarika. I'm the content program director at Rumi. So Rumi is a company that does microlearning content that's free and accessible for people all over the world. And my journey to instructional design, I think similar to many people, was a lot of loops and eventually landing somewhere pretty awesome. So I think in my youth, I had like a passion for teaching. I knew eventually I would become a teacher. And I think as I got older, I just became a little bit more jaded with the classroom teaching idea. The idea of partly the paperwork, right? And I think an element of it is that having 30 students, like I personally love a little bit more one-on-one time with students. I love being able to kind of like tailor content to their needs a bit more. And when I've had exposure to teaching, it's been more in a coaching capacity. And I think that was an important thread while I was looking for new careers. So my first job out of my undergrad was working in a nonprofit at Upper Canada College, where I got to build public speaking and debate content into high school and elementary school curriculum, which is a random job I would have never imagined existed when I was in my undergrad. But I think that was the first step to a random job no one knows exists. And from there, I really got to hone that curriculum development element. I remember within a week of like Snowden news breaking, I got to organize a mock trial in a grade 9 class. So there's this idea of just being able to be adaptive and iterative, being able to take current events really quickly and applying it. That was really wonderful. From there, I got to work for a science entertainment company, also another job I didn't know existed. I got to help curate content for Daily Planet and do segments. Hopefully this is read appropriately, but we did adult science content. So the idea was our company did not want to create science content for kids. Like we felt that was a saturated audience, right? But the idea was, how do you get a 40-year-old, how do you get a 30-year-old to like re-spark that curiosity they lost through the education system? And in that role, similarly, not a job I pictured. It didn't have like a hard instructional design element, but there was those ideas of curriculum development in the context of like an art exhibit or at the exhibition, right? How to have people have those unique educational experiences without framing it as education necessarily. And my role at Rumi, I actually was working as a project manager at an advertising agency. And I came across them because I've always had a love for microlearning. I just couldn't really find a company doing it in a way that I thought was accessible and low cost and easy enough for an average person with the expertise or knowledge in an area to be able to kind of jump in and build courses really quickly. So I started volunteering with Rumi. I did that for eight months for fun. I got to build content about the Big Mac Index and about like health content and random content about water and sheep, etc. And from there, I was like, wow, I really love this. It's not where I saw myself necessarily, but I realized like, okay, maybe this is what I want to do. And I actually was letting the company know I needed to take a break from volunteering so I can maybe pursue this in a bit more of an aggressive professional context. And they had an opening. So I ended up becoming their international content lead for their program in Afghanistan. So again, not a job I had thought of existing prior to this, but I actually really love the instructional design element. In the year I've been here, I've gotten to work with about 250. We call them learning designers for similar reasons that Michael explained. But some of the unique challenges is also making sure we're making content that's optimized for being translated, which has a whole nother layer of problems, as well as making instructional design content that maybe is like, I'm going to say we target like an 8-year-old, sorry, not an 8-year-old, a grade 8 student. So about a 13-year-old knowledge level, making sure it's accessible and localized as much as possible. So we actually have multiple types of learning designers that focus on maybe, I'm using the word translate here, not as to translate language, but to translate material into quality learning, but then also having a second layer of learning designers that then take that learning and then localize it for specific audiences. As well as translating. So that was a little bit of a messy path, but now that I'm at Rumi, I became their content director. So I lead both their English as well as programming in Afghanistan. And our hope is to expand into Spanish and French by the end of the year or early next year. I think I would say I'm not a pure instructional designer. Like I have a passion for operations and process building. And one of the things I've really enjoyed is having the experience to work with so many types of learning designers, both really early on in their career or making the transition. And though I wouldn't say Rumi's a perfect portfolio, the idea that you can be exposed to our software, it's as easy as Word to use, and then you can literally have a piece completed within 3 hours, I think is pretty wonderful. I'll try to stop plugging the company, though I'm a fan, but if you guys are curious in the future, I can always like share the links with you so you can check it out. But yeah, so that's a little bit of kind of like my journey from just being like, I think enthused about teaching and sharing knowledge all the way up to where I am right now, where I'm getting to build content on an international scale.
That is super cool. I wanted to talk about, well, first, that's really awesome that your company was thinking about how do we localize the content for other countries, because sometimes people, they really don't think about that. They think, well, it's great here, it must be great somewhere else, and you're like, maybe not. Maybe
no,
not.
definitely. I think this, like the example of a grocery store, that I think that was the tipping point where we just started listing synonyms, or just having, because we have a lot of international volunteers, just listing the words they use, and it was very clear we needed to make sure things are tailored. And I would say it's almost impossible to create neutral content. There's always going to be subtle biases, but yeah, it's essential.
Yeah. The other thing that you talked about, you were talking about jobs that we didn't know existed, and that is going to be so critical. You know, in the next 20 years, there's going to be so many jobs that are created that we can't even imagine right now, because we are in that transition to information-based society. I mean, think of all the jobs that have come about just because of this pandemic.
No, definitely. Like, I think, the idea of like chief learning officers and things like that also, like seeing the more like just like the creation of new executive roles to kind of cover the broad range. And I think the valuation of learning and education within companies, you know, as tech advances so fast, you see the value very quickly.
Yeah, for sure. All right. I am going to give it over to Daniel. Daniel, the spotlight is on you and we're ready for you.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Johnson. I am currently working as an instructional designer in the College of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Arizona. My background, as Sharon sort of hinted at in the beginning, I'm the one that she's hinting at, is in teaching English as a second language, which I did for about 8 years prior to this. Almost entirely at the post-secondary level. I taught in France, Saudi Arabia, China, and for a number of years in the US as well. But then in 2020, something happened. You'll never guess what it was. It was COVID. And international student enrollment in US universities kind of did one of these things. And all of a sudden, a whole bunch of jobs went poof, and they went gone. And I was one of those people. And so I found myself in a position where the prospects for ESL for at least the immediate future were not really looking very good. And so I ended up getting recommended actually to visit or to take part in actually one of these sessions that Sharon was running. And after watching these, I was like, oh, instructional design, I hadn't thought about that. I can do that. Because that was basically the theme of the session. Was there were a couple of Sharon and I think one other ESL teacher who presented. And after their presentation, I was like, okay, I'm persuaded, like I can totally do this. And I started, you know, immediately applying for jobs. And it actually worked out really well. It took about, I think, 3.5 months. And now I am in a new position working formally as an instructional designer in a College of Veterinary Medicine of all places. And so I don't have any background in vet med. I often joke with the faculty that I'm working with that I took my last biology class 16 years ago. That's true. But one of the nice things, at least within the realm that I'm in, is that you don't necessarily have to have that content expertise because, at least in some settings, there's someone else whose responsibility that is. And so that's great for me because I get to learn a whole bunch of new stuff, but I also don't have to master an entirely new domain at the same time. I think what also I see as significant here is that I don't have a degree in instructional design and I didn't have previous experience. I was able to, maybe through luck, maybe not, I'd like to, you know, of course, think that it wasn't just luck, that through all the skills that I had from having been a teacher, that a lot of those really transfer over well into a position in instructional design. And so I made a quick list here of some of the important skills that I see as being really transferable from teaching in what I do. One of them is communication skills, which I think tend to get really underrated because we just think like, oh yeah, communication, like everyone can do it. But, well, maybe. But some people are better at it than others. And I don't know that I'm necessarily an expert, but I think especially ESL did help me prepare for that. Other things that have been really helpful for me, I think the ability to run meetings, to take good notes, organizational skills, which I think you have to develop really well if you're a classroom instructor because it's not going to work out well if you're not organized. Wordsmithing, working with people on copy editing, proofreading, giving feedback, refining objectives for courses, course objectives, module objectives, session objectives, designing course materials, structure, wording, all that sort of stuff, just thinking through how the students are going to experience those. Those are all things that I feel like I'm doing pretty regularly in my position. Though, to be fair, I've been working in this job for 2.5 months, so you know it's pretty limited experience up until now. So I think that if you are someone who's like me, who's out there as a teacher thinking about this as a field, so I would echo some of the advice that Sharon and Erica gave us in the session that I attended. Having some kind of standout skill, I think is helpful, whether that's course authoring software like Storyline or Captivate, video editing, project management, graphic or visual design. But even I think teaching experience can be enough because I'm convinced from my own experience that it can be. Because if you've been a primary instructor yourself, like you can sure as heck support instructors too. I mean, it's not as if there's nothing that you have to learn because there are often a lot of tech tools that you might have to get on top of, learning new processes, learning how content is being delivered, so on and so forth. But ultimately, those are things that you can do. And so I think, let's see how am I doing. Yeah, I'm just going to throw out another couple of questions in case you're considering instructional design as a field, something that you may just want to think about. In my search, I was searching very narrowly for university level jobs because I felt that's where I could be most marketable. But there are definitely positions in other places. I just don't know as much about them. But you might want to think about what kind of learner population you'd want to be working with or targeting toward. Is it university level? Is it corporate? Is it K-12? So on and so forth. Because there's a whole world of corporate instructional design out there that I know next to nothing about, but there's a lot of it out there. Other things to consider, at least from my experience, are you potentially looking for a fully remote position? They do exist, but that is going to shrink your pool a little bit more if that's what you're looking for. And if not, are you willing to relocate for the job? If so, it's, I think, important to sort of establish parameters for what areas are acceptable to you, what areas are unacceptable. And if you're not willing to, then kind of thinking about what local options there might be and getting right on networking. Because I think making contact with people in those areas will help get you a better idea of how you might be able to move in that direction. So that's kind of my quick tour of how I made it. It was mostly teaching, instructional design. It was a very kind of sudden shift, but I'm also really grateful for it having happened because it feels to me to be much more stable. I have a lot fewer essays to grade, which is definitely a plus. And also it just, I don't know, it feels like there's some directions for this. Like I could go back to teaching, but there are also a lot of different directions that I could go, and that this will continue to be an in-demand skill set in the future as the job market changes.
Yeah, I definitely don't miss the essays. Not one bit do I miss the big old stack of essays and thinking about how much of my life I spent really reading essays that students didn't care about. I'm sorry, that just sounds, that sounds cynical, but I mean, it's true. It's a lot of your life that you spend reading and giving comments, and then they don't do anything, and then you read it again and see nothing's done, and you're like, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing? Something I wanted to say, what you were talking about, that you didn't have to be the content expert, because you were talking about working for a veterinarian science, vet science, right?
Veterinary medicine college, yeah.
I want to echo that same sentiment because so I work in media production. I'm not a typical instructional designer. I work designing media for classes. And so like, for example, I'll work with respiratory therapy and they'll be like, we need a graphic for this. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then they would explain it to me, but it serves a purpose, because then it's you want to break it down enough so that you can explain it to a learner. And if they can't explain it to me, like, I can't explain it to a learner. So it has been different not being an ESL teacher where I was the content expert, right, in grammar or whatever it was, and looking to someone else and being like, what are you trying to say here? But I welcome it. And if you have, like Dan was saying, if you have good communication skills, as a lot of ESL teachers do, because you spend so much of your time just going back and forth, like, what are you trying to say? And being polite about it, and not making people feel bad for being, misunderstandings. It's a skill that not everybody has. So writing feedback no one will read. Oh, it's so true. Like, what did I literally spent 15 hours grading these papers and you guys did work on it. C'est la vie. Okay, let me pause the recording here. So I just want to mention that our next session will be on Tuesday, October 5th from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern again. So if you are available and want to come back and learn more, please come back at that time. Other questions we want to take now for people who are not going to be joining us live. We talked about e-portfolios, lots of cool stuff. I'm glad that we got, go ahead.
Well, one thing that Dan mentioned earlier was the communication part. Like, as an instructional designer, you have to be able to speak multiple languages, not ESL type, but just be able to speak to the IT folks who are going to be implementing probably some of the LMS stuff. You're gonna have to be able to speak to academics who, dear God, sometimes I wonder what they're even thinking. Right, with some of the stuff they come up with, like just that ability to facilitate communication is so vital to the job of an instructional designer. You're working with a handful of different people. If you're leading some video production work or some graphic design work, you're dealing with creatives who, dear God, work on a completely different clock and schedule than most sane people. So you dabbling in those spaces and getting to know them at least a little bit will put you in a position, I think, to be able to better communicate with those. Because really, an instructional designer, as I see it, or a learning experience designer, you're kind of like, you're a blend of the coach and the point guard, right? You're not doing all of the things, but you're kind of coordinating what's happening on the field of play and helping people to be there, putting other people to be in position of success, right? That course that you're designing is putting an instructor in a position 6 months, 6 weeks, 6 years from now to be able to excel inside of the classroom, and or somebody, a user down the road who is going to take an asynchronous course to be successful. So that ability really to think like other people and understand other people's perspectives is vital to do this job effectively.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dan, I sold your thunder.
No, that's good. That's great. Cassie, can you talk more about microlearning?
Yeah, so I want to say like the average e-learning course is between 30 and 40 minutes. Like that's my take, but it could be longer. So when you're building a course, I'm going to try to think of it something similar to teach. So maybe if you're covering like privacy, this is a corporate example. So like privacy policies within your company. I've done many of these over many companies, and I would say I'd be lucky if they're less than 40 minutes. Usually they vary in quality a fair bit. Oftentimes it's just like dense reading. Maybe there's a video that you're questioning, you know, often it's dated. But the idea is instead of being one big block of a course, those ideas or the learning objectives, the core content is broken down into very, very small segments. So our microlearning or very short courses are between 3 minutes and 10 minutes. That's the maximum. So the idea is instead of taking all of like the policy you would have for your company, maybe about sharing passwords or how to screen emails for security threats, and taking that and just narrowing it down into one specific idea, right? Like when to shred a document. And then it would just be walking you through that skill set, just like with like a very narrow focus. So when you left that one microlearning module, you know in your head, like, okay, I know what the use case for that one learning objective is. So the way we do microlearning is that oftentimes they're standalone, but LinkedIn Learning is a pretty good example of where they take a bigger course and they chunk it down into smaller sections. I would say, you know, are those standalone? Less so. Like they usually require the context of the previous microlearning module and the subsequent for it to be a coherent learning, but that's what microlearning is. So it's just very short e-learning courses with a narrow one specific focus or takeaway. Does that answer the question? Micro degrees. Oh yeah. Like a micro degree might be similar to a LinkedIn Learning like certificate, right? So it's the idea of just doing a really narrow focused area in which you've gained expertise or skills. And more universities are offering these like in continuing education, just because as people leave careers and are trying to just like upskill in some way. I'll stop answering questions though, unless I'm directed otherwise.
I've seen a lot of people doing LinkedIn Learning and getting badges for different, you know, instructional design skills. I've never done them, but I don't know. I tended just to want to, my path was, I'm going to just try this out by myself and see if I can make something. And then if I can make something, then I'm going to put it in an Eportfolio for people to see. And my Eportfolio was very basic. I just put it on my resume. Sorry, go ahead, Cassie.
No, I was going to say, like, I think a big part of why I've been successful in like the instructional design or like in the education world is because I approach it like very entrepreneurially, like very much about like, you know, the hustle and trying to figure out where your skill sets are a good fit and just like, you know, continuously learning and tailoring your skills for jobs. Like I would say I've applied to many jobs that I didn't think I was qualified for, and then had the interview and like conveyed how my experience in the past applies to the current situation. And, you know, many more companies than you'd expect, like, because again, instructional design and learning, like, though there are many experts, there's lots of companies who don't even know what they want yet, and they need someone to tell them what's like makes sense or what's the best practices.
That's a really good point, because especially in corporations, like they don't know how people learn. That's why they're hiring you. You're the person who understands how people learn. Go ahead.
They don't know how people learn in higher ed either. I just did a whole lecture my first day of intro class on, you know, experiential learning and learning styles inventory, specifically because people come through high school and I have to retrain them on what it actually means to learn.
Yeah.
I have a question. It's like as a teacher, I try to like kind of do my own professional development. Like I've taken like Coursera courses related to education. Sometimes I watch like say a YouTube video related to what I want to learn about, or they have these TEFL courses. They're for teaching English abroad, and I just find them useful for me to learn how to be a better teacher. You know, not too expensive, and I was just wondering if, you know, designing, you know, say things like that would fit into instructional design or not.
Do you ever think about how they might be better as you're going through them, or what if they did this here, what if they did that?
Well, I was just right now I was thinking in like say a YouTube video, say if you know, put a few questions before you watch the video, and now you watch the video, what do you think afterwards, and, you know, or reflect on your experience, or, you know, different ways you can kind of make them get more out of the content.
I think most instructional designers end up in this space because they've gone through a learning experience that wasn't that great and they think it can be better. So if you're in some type of experience or going through a LinkedIn learning course, or a Coursera course, like, this is pretty cool, but you know what, it'd be cool if they did this or this or this. You've got, that's the foundation of what you want to be an instructional designer.
My particular experience would be like I was an ESL teacher abroad, and I came back to America. I got alternative TESOL certification, and just not familiar with the educational environment in America, and just trying to catch up my skills. And that's kind of why I turned to these things, to try to accelerate my own learning. And I, you know, some of these courses they can be really helpful. And like for the TEFL course, I'm taking one right now, and they make you watch videos. They have different units where they teach you different things. They give you tests, and they make you plan a lesson. So they're not very expensive, and they're developing your skills. And I think they're, you know, I think they're helpful to teachers, and I'm sure I might be interested in something like that.
I was going to throw this out there. Like I'm not like ESL certified at all, but I have taught ESL in a very narrow window. So in Toronto, where I am, there is a really big culture of people pre-pandemic coming from other countries in the summer to take English classes. Usually, like, you know, they're professionals who are just trying to like improve their English skills for business. And this was many years ago. I noticed there was this really big gap between what's taught in the classes, which is like very basic grammar, English speaking, and the skills or the language used in the business world that they would be entering with those language skills. So I use this buzzword, like things like synergy, or what like a mock interview looks like, or how to interview someone else, or like those, like there was like a big gap of ESL skills just for like business lingo and the business world. So I ended up just like having this very narrow niche of Chinese salespeople coming to me for ESL coaching around like business language skills, or how to do a pitch, or what does a deck look like, those kind of skills, which again, I think it's the hustle, right? Like if you have that skill set already, like it's just about finding that audience that needs it.
Yeah.
I taught a business English course this summer with a community college, and I'm just interested in economics and that kind of thing. I enjoyed the subject matter very much, and but I didn't use videos or anything. And I mean, designing videos like you did, that could definitely, like an interview situation or something. that could really help too.
All right, before we totally run out of time, I want to make sure I thank everybody, my speakers, for coming. I know we had a low turnout live, but people always watch the recordings later too. So thank you, Michael and Daniel and Cassie, for joining us today and sharing your experiences. I love hearing how people get into the field and why they got into it. I think it's all great. Our next session is going to be Tuesday, October 5th from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern. And I hope I see you there. Have a great night, everybody, and thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night.